Hey, everybody. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Pine Hill Shores Board of Commissioners to order. Before we get on here for a minute, Charlie, do we have many people on?
We have a few.
Are there too many to read or?
No, attendees, we have Cheryl Smith and Mike Schutat. Staff online is Jason Baker, Julie Anderson, and Sonny Cunningham.
Okay, thank you very much.
And George.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you all for coming to this special meeting. Before we approve the agenda, I would just like to explain agenda item 4, adoption of the strategic plan. I think after we have the presentation and discussion, there's no reason why we cannot or should not adopt the new strategic plan if we feel we're ready to. So unless anybody has an objection, we'll just keep that on there. But let me ask, does anybody, would anybody like to add or delete an item from the agenda? Okay. In that case, I'd like to have a motion to approve the agenda. Okay. A second to approve. Okay, and a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. At this point, then I think what I'd just like to say is that this revision of the strategic plan has been 2.5 years in the making. We've gone through 2 chairmen to get to where we are today. And I would like to congratulate the Strategic Planning Committee, which is Chairman John Ferguson, Vice Chair Robert Cox, Michelle Powers, Suzanne Wheatcraft, Craig Lechner, Jimmy Beckham, George Green, and Ted Gotzinger, yours truly, myself, with the help of the staff here in Town Hall, which is Brian, Julie, Kevin, and Charlie, been the primary drivers behind this. So congratulate everybody. And at this point, I'd like to just turn it over to Chairman John Ferguson, who has a presentation for us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This won't take the 2 or 3, 4 hours.
178 slides.
Let's make it worthwhile.
Can't tell them in 1 minute, tell them in 50. Okay, I first of all appreciate everybody being here. I think it's important that we have committee chairs as well as the VOC and the town management team to hear what it is that the hard work that the Strategic Planning Committee has gone through to develop the strategic plan. This meeting has basically 3 objectives. One of them would be to formally present the plan the SBC's been working on for the last several months, to hopefully gain acceptance by the VOC. And also especially important is to gain support and commitment from not just the VOC, but the town management, as well as the committee chairs that do so much to keep this town moving forward. So we'll be going over the purpose of the plan. We'll be talking about the development process that we use, because I think it's important to have a little bit of background in some of the logic that we use to develop the plan. Talk about the plan elements. I'm not going to go into great detail on that because you've got the slides in front of you, and I think everybody has gotten a copy of this beforehand. Go through each and every objective probably just take too long. I'd have to be waking people up. But it's important, and I'm going to highlight certain items. And then one thing that I think is important is where do we go from here? What are the next steps? So the strategic plan's purpose is to identify the key areas and methods to support the mission and the vision. That's home base. The vision and the mission are home base for us. And so that we can achieve the vision by leadership of the Panama Shores entities. And by the entities, I'm talking about the BOC as well as the committee. Although the BOC has the overall responsibility for the implementation of the approved plan, our desire is that we use it as a guide in our decision-making, even at the different levels of the organization. And our committee believes that our strategic plan to be effective and useful must not only support the town to work to achieve the vision, but just as important is that it should serve as a tool to align the town management, the BOC, and the committee members, as well as the town population. So if we look at the strategic planning process, which is your slide 3, you can see in here that this model has been used for quite some time and it's been fairly successful. One of the reasons why we feel like it's important to maintain this model for the development and implementation of the plan is that it is a continual improvement and method, and it also identifies performance as a means to an end. In other words, if we set goals and objectives and we achieve those and we have decent measurements for those, then we're going to be in a position where we can continually improve as a town. So we're looking here at this. If you look at it in a different way, we're looking at current state. Are we moving in the right direction? What's our desired state? What are the strategies that we're going to take in order to be able to get to that desired state? And then the key element is how are we performing against those? And the whole process starts all over again. So how did we go about going through this? We have what we call a gap analysis. And if you look at the model, it's pretty much geared towards if we have a vision and we have a mission and we ask ourselves, where are we now? What is the current state versus what is the desired state? That gap, if you identify items that could be used to fill that gap, those become items that we need to be focusing on, and whether or not it's a strategic area objective or even just a strategic or implementation strategy. It's also about self-evaluation. Self-evaluation from my book has 3 different elements to it. One of them is benchmarking, which means we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to go out and identify people that are already doing the job and doing it well. And it doesn't necessarily mean other towns. It means if we have an item that we want to take a look at, and we might have a gap there, we might want to go and benchmark an organization, manufacturing organization, a town, or anybody else that is doing that job well, and then try to apply it to what it is that we're doing. So benchmarking, and we use that during our process. Ted and I and Craig went on a benchmarking trip to Wilmington to talk about what they did during the I-40 implementation in hopes that we could transfer that over into looking into what are we doing for the I-42 process that is being looked at. And obviously, the I-42 is a long-range effort, but it's going to have an impact to us as it comes to fruition. And then the third item is corrective action. Once you identify things that you're not doing well, we need to come up with corrective actions that are associated with that. Another item is citizen engagement, and we've done surveys, we've engaged volunteers, we've looked at committee involvement. In our organ, in the SPC, one of the things that we've started doing, and it needs to be more robust than what we're doing right now, but it is bringing in other committees and having them report on what it is that they're doing within their organizations so that we can gather that intelligence from those organizations and put them into our planning process. What we need to do to improve there is work, once we get this plan approved, what we would like to be able to do is work with them so that they're thinking strategically in terms of how does that fit in with the approved strategic plan and bring what they are doing into the strategic planning committee so that we can apply that in any future revisions. The other thing that we did was basically simple brainstorming. We had a lot of discussion that was brought up. People would bring items up that they thought we might need to be dealing with. And frankly, that's one of the things that happened when we started talking about the technology items that are inclusive into the planning process that we've got now. Bob brought in people on the subcommittee when they were doing the rewrite and David Balke came to the organization and provided some technological information to us so that could be included into our process. And that came about basically from the implementation of things that we did here at Town Hall. Citizen engagement is a theme that we're going to be talking about throughout this presentation, but it needs to be talked about outside of this meeting as well. Citizen engagement is not an easy thing. It's hard, and it's got to be a consistent message that continually comes across to our citizenry so that we can get them involved in our process and get inputs. And if it means that they may disagree with us, we ought to have an idea about if we disagree with them, why do we disagree? Why is it that we can't implement it? Is it something that we can do to incorporate their ideas? If it's not, then be able to explain why it's the case that it's that way. So what were the changes that we did in this process? First of all, we wanted to make it an ongoing process. In the past, it's been an event. The way I look at it is you can create a strategic plan and then you can make it so that it continually evolving, and it's an ongoing process so that we can continually improve, or we can do what we've been doing, which is write it in 2014, and then every several years, whenever we get the urge, we're going to rewrite it again. And that, to me, is a mistake and doesn't allow us to stay up with the Joneses, so to speak. It allows us, it means that we're going to have to reinvent every single time. Whereas, for example, if we go on this year, we have this input and we bring it out on on a continuing basis and we learn during the course of the year, then the next revision is tweaking what we've got as opposed to recreating something new. So that's one of the things that we have done during this rewrite. The second thing is that the committee is beginning the process, as I said, of creating a different committee, doing external presentations, liaison reporting with other committees, inclusion of the non-SPC membership into it, suggesting implementation strategy. In other words, we're suggesting implementation strategies, which in the past were known as action items. And I'll get into that in a minute. And then assessing the results and looking at measures. That's where we're going from here. And then the last thing is that the town management role is to develop implementation strategies. And these implementation strategies, what we did was we felt like the strategic plan should be at a higher level and deal with it from the strategic area, deal with it from goals and objectives, and the actions to support those would be worked upon. We may make suggestions on it, but the strategic plan itself stops at that level. And then the town management and the board of commissioners decide and prioritize what actions they're going to take to support those objectives. So let's look at the development and some of the other changes. When we looked at the current strategic areas, we did a little bit of a revision to it. Although, if you look at strategic areas, they're pretty static. We're not really seeing where if we pick the right strategic areas, those things stay pretty consistent. There is one that we added and we combined 2 or 3 others. We combined natural resources management from environmental and natural resources, water quality, and beach preservation. All of that we felt was kind of pulling together in terms of natural resources. And we changed the title basically of residential and commercial development to managing growth. We felt like that was more descriptive of what it was. Minor change. The big thing that got added was the strategic area of resilience. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but resilience has come from basically on high. And what we're doing is incorporating, this is a way for us to align ourselves with the state and county governments.
John, can I make just a quick point? I think it's important for folks to recognize that when you say we combined 3 areas into one, that wasn't the result of just one, hey, what do you think? You think we ought to combine them? This evolved over many, many meetings and many, many discussions. So it was not a cavalier approach. There was a great deal of debate as to why we would want to do that, and if we did. So there's a lot more behind what people are hearing here than they might be aware of.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so let's go into a little bit more detail into the strategic areas, goals, and objectives. And the first one we talk about is fiscal planning. I don't think there's anybody that thinks that we don't have a fiduciary responsibility with the town, but I think it's important to point out that the taxpayers depend on the town management to efficiently and effectively deal with their revenues and their expenditures. So these objectives being stewards of the town's financial sources and being vigilant regarding fiscal impacts. And those would be the two objectives under fiscal responsibility. Infrastructure had a lot of discussion in our committee. It's important to recognize that as you read through this thing, that infrastructure doesn't just include buildings and utilities. Our infrastructure is basically our ability to apply technologies to our town. And we would also say that even our natural resources are part of infrastructure, although we have pulled natural resources out as a strategic area. It's important to recognize, and I think you'll see throughout this thing, you can make an argument that some of these objectives could fit underneath a different strategic area or whatnot. But, you know, where it lands is almost not as important as the objective itself. So infrastructure is a key element. And one of the things we wanted to make sure we pointed out was the technologies and staying up with it, because it has such far-reaching effects. And not only are we staying up with what's happening and can we gather intelligence from this, but it's also how do we communicate with our citizenry, et cetera. Public safety and disaster planning. You can't really do anything around here. If anybody thinks that we don't have issues associated with our weather and that sort of thing, they haven't been here for very long. And Brian's actually put out information for this weekend over the last couple of days, and we've got to be quote unquote resilient, but we also have to have public safety factors that are associated with what's coming up just this weekend. So the objective of cross collaboration between the public service, fire and EMS and police departments really enables us to be better stewards to the citizens and visitors. Further, our geographic location of our town exposes us to some pretty high potential issues. So, I mean, even if you take out the weather and those kinds of things, that you look at what happens during the summer with the influx of visitors, that has an impact on our public safety resource. When we've got a lot of new people moving into the area, if you just look around, and I know you guys are dealing with this, the thing is that with the sales of homes and rebuilds and that sort of thing, there's an influx of people. And as a result, and then some of them may or may not have ever been here before. So knowing our regulations and knowing what our ordinances are, it's important. And I'm sure that people like Steve deals with these things when the CAC has to go out and view these lots, and people have absolutely no idea what the requirements are within our town limits. Those kinds of things have to be dealt with in terms of how that works with public safety and our natural resources. You know, one of the things that we used to always say is that our age group average age is rising. I'm not so sure that we can actually say that as much as we used to say that. Now that we've got more people coming into the town, I think with this COVID we've seen a lot more influx of people that are coming into the area, and they're not as old as me. And as a result, things change and the demographics change, and their needs for public safety change.
So we're getting younger.
You're getting
At least the
As
average
I
age.
get older, you get more and more.
Careful.
Yeah, better stop there, huh?
You're looking for approval,
I just
right?
want to get into this.
Used to be the average age was deceased.
There's plenty of jokes go around that, but better keep it to myself. Strategic area of sense of community, this is the biggest. Maintain a strong sense of community is the goal. Those are just a few words for one heck of a lot of work. So if we're going to increase the citizen engagement as an objective, we want to be able, and that comes participation, input methods, and it also is engaging subject matter experts. I was happy to see the other day when Brian put out a request for somebody on this trash pickup. Now, I don't know whether you ever got anybody.
Oh, yeah.
That's good news.
John,
But
we've got 1,354 experts in this. That's a 5-1.
Well, you had a good selection committee. So, yeah, but the fact that he's putting out something for a subject matter expert to come in, have a quick hit, and then they can either stay, get involved, get much more involved, or he can say, thanks very much for your assistance and move on. That is, to me, what we're talking about here. Making sure, we did the same thing with David being on the committee. He was a subject matter expert, and we appreciated the fact that he provided that input into our strategic planning effort. So that's a biggie right there. We want to identify, we've talked about this, or I've heard it talked about quite often, and that the part-time residents and visitors and the balancing of that with full-time residents, and they're a lot of times completely different points of view towards things. I think that there's things that you're working on now, is in the newspaper today, and that they've been working on for quite some time. And a lot of that is the input between residents, visitors, and non-residents. So some of that impact and trying to find that balance is an important factor. Okay. Resilience. When I first heard this, I thought, how are we going, what does this mean? There's a tendency, I think, a lot of times in government for us to come up with these terms and have a very difficult time understanding what the heck that means. I was raised in the Army pretty much, and there was an acronym for pretty much anything that you wanted to think about. And you almost had to be there in order to even understand what it was about. So I'm going to spend a second and define what resilience is according to the state. And that is, a resilient North Carolina is a state where our communities, economies, ecosystems are better able to rebound, positively adapt to, and thrive amid changing conditions and challenges, including disasters and climate change, to maintain and improve quality of life, healthy growth, and durable systems, and to conserve resources to present to the present and future generations. So if you take a look at our vision and our mission, you can see that there is a fairly close connection between them. It's important for us to make sure that we understand not only what resiliency is, and we have already stepped up. Kevin Reed is working pretty diligently to try to stay in touch with that and put together a committee to take a look at that for the town, which is, again, collaboration amongst different organizations. So resiliency is going to be a big deal, and the better we do it will help from a funding standpoint from the state, and will also help us in terms of resolving some of these issues that we're dealing with and getting out of them. Going through what we went through with our big hurricane here in 2018, I can tell you that the resiliency effort is hugely important to everybody, not just in this room, but the whole town. So resiliency is something that I think we need to make sure that we're dealing with directly. Natural resources management. We actually called beach preservation, called out as a specific goal due to the fiscal implications of maintaining beach and sand levels and the cooperative process in which the town and both banks, towns throughout the island on the beach master nourishment plan, so that we can maintain our qualification with FEMA. And one of the things that we've depended an awful lot on Rudy in the past, and there's liable to be some changes that are going on associated with that, just in terms of where that leadership is. And Brian and you guys are staying up with those changes. But as we adjust to those, that beach preservation that's one of the reasons why we called it out. So. Environmental, natural resource, maintain all improved aspects of the town's natural environment. That kind of goes without saying. We've got drinking water, we've got ocean and dunes and beaches and shorelines that we've got to deal with, and that's diverse. And we're going to have to make sure that we're paying attention to that, along with the wetlands and the canopy, pond, all sorts of things that, and maritime forest. So these dealing with those environmental aspects. And then the last one is water resource management. Steward of our water resources. We have spent a lot of time, effort, and money on the stormwater, and thanks to Brian and his crew, Sunny, we have had a very collaborative effort between, just call out the club and the town associated with putting together this phase 1 and phase 2 of the stormwater project. I think has been a very successful endeavor, and as we move forward, I think it's important that we continue that role. We've got sea level rise. Another article in the paper today regarding sea level rise and the impact of that, and the flooding that occurred just recently, and the potential for flooding to increase even more. So a lot of water resource management is on our agenda. And the final thing, final strategic area is managing growth, maintaining the land use plan, establishment of general plans for development, growth management. It's really intended to assess the challenges facing us and making reasonable decisions associated with our growth. What's going to impact it? You know, I would use I-42 again. It may be years down the road, but I think we're going to start seeing some inroads to that, even with these bypasses that are being put through. So, so those are the strategic areas in brief. Want to talk a little bit about next steps in closing. You can see on the listing that we've got there, obtain approval for the plan. You got to have that before we move forward with it. And then the finalization of implementation strategy. We've made some recommendations. Brian and his crew have come up with some recommendations. When you're off-site coming up, some of the discussion will be on these implementation strategies. You can see that this is a strategic plan that's pretty broad. So there's going to have to be a prioritization process that goes through and between the town management and the DOT. What are the vital few items that are going to be needed? But there's another point that I want to also make, and that's also incorporated into this, is that when the committees make a decision, are we looking at the plan? Are we involved? When we make a decision to this, does it align with the plan? Because if it aligns with the plan, it aligns with your vision and your mission. It all works in concert if the VOC, the town management, and frankly, all the committees are working. Once the plan is approved, if we all work together for it, then John knows whether or not the strategic planning committee or the recreation committee is actually making decisions associated with, is it in alignment with the strategic plan? And there is trust that is built up between the different committees and the town manager. So coming up with which are the priority items that we're going to be working on needs to be communicated as well. We're going to be working on trying to get much more community involvement, but obviously all of the entities need to be dealing in that as well. I'm going to be kind of going around, and hopefully I can get on the agendas of the different committees once this plan is approved to talk to them about the strategic plan and have an informal discussion about where they think that they can fit into the plan and where we think that they can fit into the plan. And hopefully we will gain alignment as we move through that. Another item that we're going to be working on as a strategic planning committee along with the town is to come up with a dashboard of performance, basically of performance measures, whether or not we are making progress on the plan. That is reporting how is it that we are going to make sure that you folks are kept abreast of progress that is being made either through the town or through the various different committees. So frankly, in my opinion, there ought to be an agenda item that is on there, or for example, the CAC or the planning board, is there a tie? What is it you're working on and where does that tie come in for the strategic plan? Then we're going to be working on the, any tweaking that needs to be done to the strategic plan. And on an exception basis, discuss with you any changes that are going to be, that we would recommend to you for the 2023 revision. So that concludes my formal comments. If anybody's got any questions, I'll be glad to give them to somebody else.
John, if you stay right where you are for the time being.
Okay?
Before I open it up for comments, questions, and discussion, I'd like to first invite the Vice Chair, Robert Cox, to make a few comments if you have some, and then the Town Manager, Brian Kramer, on any of the things John has said, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Mayor Brodman, thanks. I appreciate it. I don't really have any comments. I think John pretty well covered most of what we wanted to talk through, and I'll add a few things as we have the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
Mayor, and everyone, as I told the SBC, last time we met, now the easy part's over. The hard part is the racking and stacking and prioritizing and seeing how we actually do all this. So the next step of implementing actions, deciding where to commit resources and time and staff time and volunteer time and board time, that's going to be probably the greatest challenge we face in this.
All right. Anybody? Bill, please.
First of all, I want to thank you, John, and the entire committee. I think you've done an excellent job, and it certainly shows you the time that you've spent preparing this. The only comment that I have, and maybe you've already discussed it, is the subject of man-made disasters. It does appear under Public Safety and Disaster Planning Objective 2 refers to prepare for and be ready to react to natural and man-made disasters. However, I wonder if under resilience, it shouldn't also be addressed there. Of course, the goal references severe storm or other natural disasters, but does not reference man-made disasters. And the other thing is under the SWOT analysis, under the threats, I think perhaps you should add man-made disasters as a threat. Those are my two comments I have.
Yeah, on resilience, well, they have man-made infrastructure. I think we could probably add something along those lines. But
I mean, it seems to focus on storms and natural disasters and floods and all those kind of things, but we could potentially have a man-made disaster.
Right.
Something, you know.
Okay.
yeah, man-made infrastructure could fail.
Fine.
Yeah, I've got a couple, it's not on the, great job, it's not on the specifics of the approval adaption, but it's more for our discussion at the offsite. Just maybe some ideas. I really like the idea of, at least for us, I think all the committees, but even as a board, when the staff presents us with a decision to have, this falls under this strategic plan and here's the goal that it falls under. I think it'd help you guys, Brian, too, as you go back in a year in a review, you can go and say, we did this, 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 and this.
Yeah, we talked, a couple of us, talking to Kevin and Julie. We should perhaps, for major decisions,
Yeah.
board meetings, almost have a consistency comment, similar to what CAMA does. So every time a decision, formal board decision is made, requiring, again, expenditure of resources, be it time or money or both, that we tie it to this somehow, so consistency statement.
Or even, I would think even just Charlie having it in the minutes where you could
Right.
pull it back. The other thing is as we discuss priorities and stuff, some of the things that jumped out with me is participation of town programs. And, you were talking about changing demographics of the town. Do we need to address that and pulling in, that changing demographic? I love the idea of digging into how are part-time residents different from full-time residents and what are the similarities of their thoughts? And then maybe kind of align with that. And then you said resiliency, you said economic resiliency was part of that too. And I guess I'm scratching my head a little bit of how, because we're such a small town and not an economic powerhouse, do we work in any economic resiliency? Or is that just more of a county thing?
Well, I think that if you look at the beach preservation process itself,
That would
ties
be
in with resiliency pretty tight.
more economic, yeah. But that's more kind of offsite into the weed stuff. I just would love to discuss more.
And I think that particular one that you mentioned, this is an example, would be tied specifically to our engagement with county and state government,
Mhm.
because there's direct impact from that on our financial resilience or our
Yeah.
economic resilience.
Yeah, things like this sales and use tax distribution. I mean, if the county decides to do it on a per capita basis, we could be screwed.
I don't want to leave your comment about the tying with when reporting to the Board of Commissioners and tying it to the strategic plan or which objective it falls under and that sort of thing. I don't want to blow past that. That to me is a reinforcement of what the plan is and tells us whether or not we are making progress toward it. I think that's an important, it's a small thing,
Mhm.
but it has a big impact for me.
It does. And
Yeah, I think I think it shouldn't be delegated to be just a footnote. That, yeah, we check that block off. I think it's a great point. I think how we do that is probably what we may want to discuss, but I think John's right. There's more to that than just acknowledging that there's a tie there.
Mhm.
Okay.
John, I just have a question on natural resources part of it, and then a comment on something else. But on the oceanfront non-conforming structures, I presume what you're referring to there are those where the beach is eroded, so the structure, some older structures are too close but camera to the ocean. Is that what you're referring to there?
Yeah, that, and you've got structures, making sure that you've got dunes properly done. So are we maintaining those in the proper way?
Oh, okay, so structure in that case also means dunes,
Yeah.
not just,
Whatever structure
no, that's,
that it's going to take in order to protect.
yeah, because
But it, primarily it was whether or not the housing and that sort of thing are meeting the requirement.
because we did have,
That's the beauty of writing these things. It sounds like it's very, very general, and it is. So when we build the implementation strategies to do this, you've got you've got an umbrella in which to write these actions that need to be taken.
I was just trying to get the specific reference, because it says manage the number of oceanfront non-conforming structures. So that tends to take the mind towards not dunes, towards buildings. And that's all.
Primarily, that's what it is.
Okay.
Well, right now, I think it ties in with resiliency directly too. I mean, all these things are kind of cross-referenced in many ways in my mind. But like right now, we probably don't have a lot of non-conforming oceanfront structures, especially because we have an exception to the rule, and because we've just had these big beach renourishments, which has pushed the
Right,
oceanfront back a ways. But that could change, with sea level rise and with a lot of other things over the long term. So it gets into that long-term resiliency kind of question, I think.
And my only other comment had to do with the citizen engagement part. I too think you folks have done a really good job of updating this and making it more functional and so forth. I would point out that that's already increased quite a bit from when the public essentially couldn't speak at a public meeting. That changed some 10 or 15 years ago, but I think they can be drastically improved in every committee. We need to think about how to do this effectively, but to provide an opportunity within any meeting. It's for some cases, rather just being able to speak for 3 minutes, it might be 10 or 15 minutes in the beginning of the meeting or 10 or 15 minutes at the end. If you only have one or the other, it's always going to come wrong because they won't be able to comment about what you've just done, or you won't have comments about what they were going to do if you don't have it in the beginning. But I mean, I think we can all try to keep this in our mind and make it so the people sitting in the audience have an opportunity without logging down the meeting to provide the appropriate input so that people will have that and not make a decision unknowing what the feelings are. I think all of us need to work on that.
I
Myself
think you've
and
taken
all
the
of us.
first step right there.
So, well, but I just,
Well, if you're thinking about it and you're looking for a way to deal with it, that to me is half.
I just wanted to acknowledge that. I
Yeah.
think we all have to buy into that, to do that. And I think we ought to be able to realize with an issue that I'm not sure any of us thought, I'm not sure some of us thought, I'll put it that way, just own myself, was as sensitive as it was, even though we knew that it was sensitive, the recent issue of transportation up and down 58. But the more impact, may not get resolution, but the more impact so the people have their point put across. And I for one think it's better to be one-on-one and not a questionnaire, because I think questionnaires get too misinterpreted, as was pointed out by some of the residents. But to engage that and know that you're not going to get unanimity on anything, but at least you have the information to be able to effectively and hopefully hear what's being said and move forward.
Yeah, we had over 300 written comments.
Yes, yes, no, and I appreciate every one of those. But then I had to get through reading it and saying, okay, now where are we?
It's lonely at the top.
However, you need to engage with democracy, you need to engage it or get out of town, you know?
Just to follow up on Clark's first question about non-conforming structures. We also had the issue that if a non-conforming structure is damaged and they want to rebuild,
The 50 cent.
then
rule.
you, more than 50% of some discussion there, whether it's size or dollars, what it's going to be. But we need to watch that.
I think that's a good point, though, because that happened during the Florence issue, where a lot of those residents on the beachfront ended up having to go more than 50%, and it ran into a whole bunch of issues when it came time for inspections and that sort of thing.
Yeah, something we need to keep in mind, and
Especially
maybe harsh
moderators.
reality when the time comes, but we have to stick to what our code says.
That's why I just wanted that definition,
Yeah.
just so you're aware of it, so.
Anybody else? Anybody?
Hall Planning Board. George Green, are you with us?
I'm with you.
George and I talked earlier on the phone about collaboration between citizens and planning boards, or the different boards, or between citizens and just how can we improve the collaboration between the citizens and the board? You touched on it, Clark. You touched on it with citizen involvement. George, you want to expand your idea?
Well, what I have observed, Paul, is that in our meeting, quite often, you will ask the committee to let's go to an open session. And in that open session, anyone in the room is invited into discussing the issue. But you also sit at the head of the table, and when you see this discussion is getting out of control, you can request us to come back into a formal meeting saying that we will get into more detail on this later on. And to me, what you have provided in that meeting is you have provided that citizens there to participate in what's going on. You have not forced him to talk about it before the meeting and then complain about our decision afterwards. You have got them perfect. You have got them involved in that situation.
It's good. George is a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
Now that's the first lie that I've heard so far.
George, good George. Behave.
I suppose we could even do that with webinars as long as we have COVID, but it's more difficult. Charlie, it would be possible though, right? To invite people, but
I think it,
yeah.
It'd be hard to regulate, but.
I think it works well for the committees and then our co-committee, like when we have meetings off. I think it's the bigger board. I think it could get out of hand unless we had a specific meeting for that purpose, if that makes sense. So we weren't here to midnight.
Or over time, if we kind of develop an understanding of
We have the 30 minutes.
that we can't really turn every board meeting into an open town hall
Yeah.
type forum. Because we're already here till from 6 to 10.
Oh, that was unusual.
Most meeting nights. And if we opened up to a town hall, I mean, I don't know if we'd ever get any business done, but perhaps we could do it on a limited basis. I mean, if we have big enough issues, like, sidewalks tend to focus the mind. We have an issue like that, then I think it's useful to have a town hall meeting, perhaps. I don't know if we do it in COVID or not, but Michelle?
Yeah, not to bring up what other states do, but I will, in my New York experience. I was shocked when I came to my first meeting here to realize that you had to speak at the beginning and the end, and you didn't know what your board was going to be deciding. So, because my experience in New York was you could make your comments based on what was being discussed, and it's up to the chair to control it. And I think in most cases here, people are not going to get too much, that you're not going to be able to control that. But John, as the mayor, you've controlled enough meetings and things, and I think all of our mayors were strong enough leaders that you can do that easily enough. And it makes people feel that they truly are part of the decision, not just having to guess what you're going to do in the beginning or then react after you made a decision. It's almost as though their opinion at that point doesn't matter. So, think about it.
Yeah.
We do it now in public hearing, but that's because it's on one particular thing. So, in terms of improving the communication and the involvement of the citizens, I think it's something perhaps would be well worth your looking into.
Thank you for the vote of confidence.
John.
Mr. Chairman, this is George. I have a comment. One other practice that I have seen used in Pine Knoll Shores was our former mayor liked to have dinner with the mayor.
Mhm.
And it was not well attended, but those people that did go to that discussion had the opportunity to talk to the mayor about anything that was on their mind. He did not limit it in any fashion. And the only weakness that I saw in it was that you couldn't get very many people there. And especially the second homeowners, he would try to hold one around a holiday period here in town so that some of the second homeowners would attend. And if I recall, there was the mayor and some of the commissioners that even drove up to Raleigh to present some things there because there was a group of second homeowners in that area. So there are other ways of getting around that different than what we're doing today. And let's be bold enough to try some of those things. We spoke about going to other towns to see what they did about I-42. Go to other towns and see what they do, dealing with this. Benchmark them.
Yeah, we have tried to schedule a number of dinners with the mayor here, but, during this COVID period, it was always.
Yes,
But
sir.
It clearly aren't to continue.
I have difficulty even working well in the meeting environments we've got here, not being able to be face to face.
Yeah.
But I'm not ready to lay my life on the line right now to see y'all.
I think the dinner with the mayors the one we went to was well attended. Like you said, in Raleigh, I think we had a bunch of people.
Regarding the second homeowner, I attended many dinners with the mayor, and the two most heavily attended regularly was the July one, which we intentionally did on a Saturday,
Mhm.
and then the February one, which we did in Raleigh.
I would think of Raleigh.
We would have
people.
25 or 30 folks at each of them, so both on the public input and on the outreach to second homeowners, there's
So maybe we need to
there's a
put that
potential there.
on our agenda if we're going to start alleviating some of the COVID stuff. That needs to be added maybe.
Mhm.
I just want to compliment Paul, having been liaison to the planning board for quite a while. I think the way he's handled it, often it's situational. I think he observes from what's going on in the audience, and maybe this one, there has to be a little bit more conversation. And actually, I think the way that he asks his members, he'd like to go into open session. And so what it says to the audience is the rest of the board is supporting the chair to do that. And then he also, in an informal way, asks it's time to come out of it. Again, it reinforces to the audience that they've had enough. My turn, not yours. My turn. So I think there's a way to maneuver through it, John, that's all.
A timer probably works good too.
With respect to the sidewalk issue, we certainly had a lot of citizen input, over 300 comments. So I'm not so sure opening it up at the meeting would have made any difference on that because we already had the input. Some things you don't have it ahead of time and perhaps you need the input. But I know I think I suggested in the past, at least recommended it somewhere, that I'd be in favor of an open meeting at a separate time.
Mhm.
A separate meeting, maybe once or twice a year of the Board of Commissioners, where it's an open agenda.
No,
Right.
You limit the time,
there's various ways.
but it's an open agenda.
That's a good idea.
Charlie, how many citizens are online right now? You had one to start with before.
We have 8 residents.
I don't understand what you mean by citizens. To me, we're all citizens except for the staff.
Yeah. that's-
George, there were staff people online as well. We had the news online, George, and we had department heads online.
Well, good.
6 staff and 8 people from the public.
Do you keep any kind of a log on how many we normally have at a town meeting?
I can print out spreadsheets on our last
That
meeting.
would be interesting to look at, I think.
More, yeah.
I'd appreciate a copy of that if I could have it.
I think other
And
too is
if
when,
you really want to pull a crowd in, feed them.
yeah.
Feed them and you'll have to hold it out in the parking lot.
Social distance.
I know.
Well, feeding the hand that bites you.
That's right.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Just don't let it bite you too hard.
I think there's lots of opportunity for that flexibility if we would push subcommittee meetings, like when we do say, hey, that needs to go to the admin committee or that's the finance committee. There's so much more flexibility for citizen input in that kind of platform where you're like gathering information and trying to put together a report to bring to the board.
Like I know after our last board meeting, I had numerous emails from people in town. But most of them were from, and comments on the sidewalk issue, of
Right.
course.
Yeah.
But most of them were from people that was their first meeting. They're new in town and their first introduction to the issue. So what they saw in that board meeting was a snapshot in time of this discussion that we've been having for 15 years or more. And so it was, it's an effort of, I responded to all of them, but tried to put it in the context of our longer term program or our longer term discussion of this one. But it's a good idea. Steve?
I appreciate it. For all those on the phone, I'm Steve Phelps, Chair of the CAC. I want to go to that next step. I want to get you on my 9 a.m. the 16th, the CAC meeting.
Okay.
Come in and give a little speech to my group about your committee. Eddie did a good job this morning, but I'd rather have you there too. And touching on citizen involvement on committees, the struggle I have is getting people who are compassionate but don't have really a background, and it's a struggle to meet the mission of the town and strike the balance of development and allowing people to cut a tree to build their house. And then, that balance is very difficult. So, and it's compounded when you have storms, when we can go in and cut trees down when we have a moratorium on permits.
And we don't want to go past the training aspect of this when an individual has an interest in doing something. We don't want to shut them down because they're not subject matter experts, but we also want to make sure that we've got knowledgeable people that are doing the jobs that they're volunteering for. So to me, and something that we might want to take a look at is how do we train people up that have a passion for it, but don't really know the ordinances, don't really know, like me, I don't know about trees, but I could learn. And whether or not there's a mechanism in there for people to be able to do that, I don't know.
John, this is George.
George,
You
wait a
got
minute. George.
Okay, yes.
Hold up, George, please. My goal is to try to push education. If I can do it through education on the CAC and replanting of trees, then I think we meet our long-term goal, which is what you
Like you did with the CCEC effort. I thought that was.
Yeah.
First
Yeah,
class.
it is hard. That was a tough one too. Some citizens just don't want it. And the ones who complain that when we cut it to the minimum, the trees, the line's already back up in the power line. So it's, that was tough. It's only in certain spots though.
Okay.
So anyhow, if you would come, that'd be great.
Okay, George, you're on.
Okay, we have wonderful opportunity in front of us as we develop the UDO. It's going to go through every ordinance we have related to land use in my mind and state a new position that improves where we're at. So all of those that would like to become educated in the ordinances have the opportunity of attending those sessions. Now, it's my understanding that a function of the UDO is to have focus groups from the community giving input as it goes along. So you've got an opportunity here, number one, to educate on ordinance, but you've also got an opportunity to educate on tree conservation and conservation, things of those nature there. Now, it's real easy to talk about this. It's a whale of a job to pull all of this together and make it happen.
We have focus groups and we have unfocused groups.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Do we need a motion or we?
Like,
No.
with any of the things brought up here today, I mean, should we say Bill's comment here? I think you were actually suggesting some actual
The
word changes.
man-made
to the
disaster
document.
language, yeah.
I mean, that's fairly minor. I think if we could trust the strategic planning committee to simply add it and then come back. I mean, is there any reason why we shouldn't approve this today, do you think?
In substance, just say it in substance. And then I move we approve the plan as presented in substance with a few editorial differences as pointed out by Commissioner Connect.
Okay, a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? Are there any things we haven't, well, the one issue of further discussion is when we're approving this in substance, I guess we'll then maybe at a subsequent meeting, we'll just go back and approve it in its entirety. Is that, was that something?
That would be fine.
Okay, all right.
And maybe at that meeting, that could be a practice one where you open it up to sort of like a public hearing. If anybody had any comments, they can comment.
Wait, I'm
You know, that would be a
confused.
substance of what's in here.
I'm so confused. I thought we were approving the strategic plan and then the town manager is going to start putting together implementation strategies was the steps, that we don't have to approve this again.
I think in effect, we are.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I think I can make a motion with just a couple words to add that may satisfy my concerns.
Okay.
Just do as an amendment.
As it, I guess, be an amendment to your motion. In the strategic area resilience area, under the goal, I would move that we add the language man-made disasters. Let's say after the severe storm, third line, severe storm, comma, man-made disasters or other natural disasters. Just add it, those couple words there, man-made disasters. And then on the SWOT analysis, under the threats, I would simply add at the bottom of the list, man-made disasters.
Is that,
As amendment.
Yeah, I think that,
even though,
that covers what
That's good.
I had.
That's easy. That way we don't have to talk about it. And we don't have to work at another meeting on it.
okay, with those changes then, are you ready to remove your in substance? Well, okay, and we have a new motion on the floor to approve the strategic plan with those few changes. Second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you, John. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Get to work on the next revision. Sure. Robert, Vice Chair, has some.
Yeah, well, just one nickel back. And with Michelle and George both here, either online or in attendance, The work that was done, I also want to acknowledge, because as you said, Mayor Brodman, this has been about 2.5 years now. Bob Holman was the chair when we really started this whole process. Bob Warren was a part of our committee, and as stated already, David Balch. These committees, these subcommittees, can be made up of not just the committee members. So anybody who has an expertise or just an interest in being on these committees, assuming we advertise what we're doing, you don't have to be a member. Anybody, any citizen who has an interest in it can be a part of it, and we certainly welcome their addition to those committees. So that's all. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple more folks that hadn't been.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Anybody else? Michelle?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's wonderful that you approved it, because when I think of the hours and hours that we spent, first in the rewrite committee, and when I tell you we agonized over words, and then we would bring it back to the larger strategic planning committee. And of course, members they'd pick up on things that we didn't. And we had to go back and we had to redo it. I mean, Robert was sending out rewrites, it seemed like every other day. So it was a big effort, but I know for the rest of the committee, and I'm sure George will agree online, that we're pleased that you have bought into this and you feel that it's a good start. I think the committee is still committed to working with Brian and the staff if there are things that we can help to add in terms of implementation.
Sure. Yeah, I can't go without having a comment from you, George. You there?
Hello, Bart. What was your statement?
I said, George, we can't really close this meeting without a comment from you.
Okay, a comment from me is that our success going forward will be the multiple relationships of our committees and the commissioners working together as a town. If we do that, we will disagree, but we will eventually work out differences that will put us all together and dramatically increase our overall involvement with citizens here.
Okay, thank you, George.
Well said.
Thank you. Okay, at this point,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you. Favor, say aye.
Aye.
I don't know if you're typing, but
Yeah,
that's what
just-
he withdrew it was just two places, but just make sure he
Yeah.
got it all, because I know he was typing like crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I think we can